And welcome. I'm Karen Plater, Associate Secretary for Stewardship and Planned Giving, and I'll be hosting the webinar. And then I've got Betty Kupian, the Chief Operating Officer of the Presbyterian Church Building Corporation. And I hope, Ainsley is there. I haven't seen her just a second. Oh, she can't get in. Maggie, can you send Ainsley a link? Okay, just a second. Or Betty.
Yep, I'll get her a link, no worries.
Okay, great, good. Okay, all right. Just a quick note that this webinar is supported by your gifts to Presbyterian Sharing, and it's a part of equipping your congregations in worship, evangelism, stewardship, communications, making decisions about their buildings. And I'm going to ask Betty to share with the land acknowledgement for us.
We acknowledge that congregations across Canada are on the traditional territories of various Indigenous peoples. The Presbyterian Church in Canada national offices are on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, Petun, Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit Indigenous peoples. We are on a journey of healing and reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples.
All right, so what are we talking about? Well, we've come to talk about what it means and some tools that are available for congregations who are looking in exploring development and or redevelopment of their properties and or buildings. Now, the type of redevelopment that we're talking about is more than just renovating an existing building to better serve the congregation. That's very excellent work, and there are some funds that will help this. But this is a larger fund and is really about the revisioning and reworking of buildings and property so that we maximize service to the community through housing, particularly affordable housing and or community space for the common good. So this may mean for some congregations that have excess property on the land, that they're building something beside a church. It may mean adapting the church and renovating the church significantly to add new space or to make it more accessible. These are all part of long-term plans for the sustainability of the ministry and facilities. And the programs that we're talking about need to be connected to a Presbyterian congregation, ministry, or presbytery. And so this is part of our stewardship of our land, just as we are given gifts, financial gifts, and as congregations and a church, we steward those. This is one way that we can look at stewarding the property that we have. And so we're always trying to look at that and say, what's the role and how can this fit into God's mission and us serving God? There's few definitions that we have for housing, and this is one of the challenges when we start to talk about affordable housing, is that there's many different definitions, and it can vary from municipality to municipality, let alone from province to province. But often we find that there are various terminologies that might talk about affordable housing, and this is housing that's affordable for people who have a family income around $45,000 to $90,000. Again, varies across the provinces, across the country, but it's sort of houses that would be affordable for families that are supported by nurses, teachers, delivery truck drivers, personal support workers, lab technicians, early childhood educators. Then there's a definition often, and it can vary, the level of income can vary, where we're talking about deeply affordable or rent geared to income, often for when the family's income is less than $45,000. And so this could be grocery store workers, dishwashers, restaurant servers, lab assistants, people on disability. And then there's supportive housing. And so a housing where there are supports for life skills, but still have independent living. So That's where the residents are provided support in their day-to-day life, but not actually the support of their day-to-day, everyday activities. And then there's the deeply supportive or supportive housing with medical supports for people with brain injuries, developmental disabilities, chronic mental health conditions, addictions. So there can be, again, various definitions and words that are used in your municipality or your region, but this is just an idea to say that there are different definitions of affordable housing, and there are different roles for all of these types of housing. In part of what we want to do is try and meet the housing crisis that's going on across Canada. And then what do we mean when we talk about the space for social good? And this is providing community space where programs that can benefit the community may happen. So it may include having partners and/or tenants who support community development by addressing things like food security, social isolation, loneliness, education, providing space for small businesses and entrepreneurs and community activities, charities, nonprofits, social services. Or it may be a partnership with your local municipality to house a library, for example, or provide some city-funded daycare. The idea is that it's accessible and for the social good. And we know that over the years, churches have often provided this space. And we've seen as churches close down across Canada that this space is being lost. And so it's really important to protect and include this space there. All right, let me introduce who is here and who will be part of the presentation, but particularly answering your questions. I'm Karen Plater, and I'm the Associate Secretary for Stewardship and Planned Giving. My education was in community development, particularly international development, which is why I started working for the Presbyterian Church in Canada 29 years ago with Presbyterian World Service and Development. But for the past 18 years, I've been working with congregations and specialized ministries on issues related to stewardship, particularly talking about ways that we can fund ministry today and into the future. I've done quite a bit of work to support congregational treasurers, lay leaders, and ministers, and helped organize the Stewards by Design conference, which really helped me learn a lot about how we do ministry and how we can support it with both gifts of finances, but also time and talent. And how I love the phrase, many of you will have heard me use it before, but money follows mission. And so it's really good that we stay focused on what our mission is as churches and congregations and how God is working through us. A few of the things that I am doing is I work with Ainsley Chapman, and she's going to introduce herself shortly, who is the executive director of Evangel Hall. And we've been working together on a committee for, I think, about 5 years now. And formally, we signed a contract with her and Evangel Hall so that up to 40% of her time can be used for supporting Presbyterian congregations. I do communication about the program and help coordinate webinars such as this. I'll meet one-on-one with congregations and/or presbyteries or with small groups to do mentoring and coaching and encouragement. I'm helping facilitate the committee to review the grants and develop the application process, organizing consultations and participating in ecumenical collaboration. Any of you who are wondering, in the Hopes and Possibilities work that was approved by General Assembly, one of the work is to bring together all of the committees that have looked at property and land and see, are there things that need to be adjusted or changed within the national context to support this type of work. All right, and Betty, I know you introduce yourself.
Hi. As many of you know, I'm a professional accountant, and I have been in the role of Chief Operating Officer at Presbyterian Church Building Corporation since 2020. I am the coordinator of the lending services for all loans available to PCC congregations, and entities of PCC through the Presbyterian Church Building Corporation, and also through the Presbyterian Church in Canada, the loans that are available. PCBC enables congregations to obtain the funds necessary to build or expand their facilities. More recently, we have been receiving loan requests for redevelopment projects from congregations revisioning their buildings in order to better serve the congregations and to maximize service to the community. And this is being done, as Karen mentioned, through housing or creating community space. The needs of PCC congregations and entities are evolving, and we are pivoting to accommodate the changing needs. And you may visit the PCBC page on the PCC website to learn more about the PCBC or contacting us directly. I'm also involved. What I'm doing presently is determining the financing and project requirements for the entities, and I also serve as a consultant on the committee to review the grants and develop application process. And the rest is, I think, self-explanatory. I'll stop there.
Mm-hmm. And we really are working together, and Betty was one of the ones who helped identify a need for us to have a committee and support for congregations in the early on in the redevelopment process, because sometimes she would get the loan applications and thought, oh, there could have been some work done here or there. So we're trying to really work together so that by the time project is to the loan process, they have dotted all the I's and crossed the T's and know everything that's going on. So it's fantastic that we're working together on this.
Yeah.
And then we do have an official collaboration between Evangel Hall and the Presbyterian Church in Canada to help support churches in their redevelopment work. And I'm going to turn it over to Ainsley to chat about this.
Thanks. So one of the fun things that I have with my job is, because I've been working in housing for the last decade, my role is such that I'm able to straddle the housing world and the church world. And one of the interesting things that came up is, we do a lot of work in the housing world to advocate, to try and build, to advocate for more funding for building, looking at what housing needs are of people at all different levels. And then working with churches who have never really had these discussions and are really starting fresh and haven't really had the time or opportunity or need to think through these things. And so one of the things that I'm able to do is bridge these two worlds. And there's not a lot of folks who are able to move back and forth. The housing world tends to be very isolated, and the church world tends to be very isolated. So something that we were able to do is with EHM. So initially when I started, I was just there. We're a housing provider. We have a day shelter as well. We did some strategic planning and starting in 2019, and it became very clear we're very good at housing. There's a need for housing. And we really wanted to grow as an agency. And something that, as it became clear, as we started talking to the national office, the level of knowledge and skill and that ability to move between housing and church worlds was going to be a real asset. And that was something where we said, okay, maybe there's a way we can work together. So we've set up a 4-year MOU where I'm able to take all the information, expertise, and ability to broker relationships and give that back to churches across the country. And so this is a little bit about the collaboration. So yeah, next slide. So, I do a lot of work speaking at conferences. I'm very active in the housing world. One of the things that's really interesting is in Toronto, I'm part of multiple different networks, coalitions, advocacy groups that are looking at what the different needs are of folks with housing, and we are advisors to the City of Toronto. So when the City of Toronto wants to make a change in policy around housing, or maybe it wants to introduce a new funding program to generate new housing. They come to us and they ask us, are we on track? Are we thinking correctly? What feedback do you have? So I'm one of the groups of folks who's providing expert advice to the City of Toronto. I'm also on the CMHC Communities of Faith working groups. The CMHC is also flagged that communities of faith, not just Christian, are all trying to figure out what to do with their land. So they've brought together a community of experts to help think through some of the challenges. So some of the things they're working on are everything from zoning and heritage to how can we get seed money into the hands to help support feasibility studies, things like that. And I spent a lot of time working with developers and people in the industry, everything from private sector developers all the way to nonprofit developers to faith-based experts. So I've got to use an outdated term, I've got a pretty wide Rolodex of folks, and a lot of my time is spent trying to figure out how to align and connect people. So part of what I've been doing is representing what are the concerns of churches, what are the concerns of the PCC at a lot of these housing tables, locally, regionally, nationally. And then flip side, I'm also providing direct information and coaching to churches, less about the nitty-gritty of details of the development process, but more to help them understand what is possible. What would we consider taking on? What are the first few steps? How do we get started? And then, of course, connecting them to a range of professionals that can help them do all of that work.
And Ainsley, while you're based in Toronto, how are you finding it is doing this work nationally?
What I found is it's really interesting is that, other than the time zone adjustments, everyone across the country is really facing the same issues. So, a church in Nova Scotia will say, we've got this really unique situation. And when in reality, it's the same thing, the same challenges, the same needs, the same interests in rural Ontario, in Brandon, in BC, some of the things that are different around like the politics, like where the money is, what approval processes, the culture of approvals and things vary by municipality. But fundamentally, what churches are experiencing is completely consistent across the country.
Yeah, and I especially think so at this stage that we're helping and looking at, which is the feasibility and discovering possibilities stage. So maybe you can introduce this.
Yeah, so it's really exciting to start thinking about what could this land do and what could our property do for the community, do for us. One of the things that we have to start doing is, we've got this beautiful imagining that we have to be able to do, but then we also have to sort of get an expert to help narrow it down to see what can and cannot happen on land. So for example, there's obviously the physical property. I know that we've talked to some folks who had great ideas, except it turns out they were on the edge of an embankment that was eroding. So we know that there are going to be limits to what could be done on that land. In some cases, it's social. The biggest challenge is going to be getting approvals from neighbors. Not a complete barrier, but things that we have to think about. The political environment, government priorities. The number one thing in most communities is if your project is helping to solve a problem that your municipality has, they become very flexible and amenable to things that they wouldn't necessarily want to do if it was a private developer. So the more social good your project has, the more support you're going to get. So that's where the feasibility sort of looks at what is it you're thinking about doing and how would it be received by your municipality, by your neighbors, by your local politicians, and also explain, there's a lot of misinformation around what housing is. I've heard folks say, well, affordable housing means people who don't work. And in fact, the definition of affordability, which Karen had mentioned, is really about affordability for people who are working. There's also some fears of, but if we bring in deeply affordable or folks with health challenges, does that mean there's going to be conflict in the building or problems? There is a big range of people who need housing and different types of housing, and that's something else as an expert in housing and tenant needs. That's something that I also do is work with churches to help them figure out what type of housing and what type of supports could they manage? Could they do maybe with a partner? what would be supported by the neighboring community. So when you talk about housing, you're really talking a big range, and that's part of what the feasibility study would do. So for example, you would never want to put folks who generally don't have cars in a neighborhood where there's no public transportation. So these are some of the things we think through, is who would be the best person to live in that building with your current infrastructure and environment.
And we've talked about, and as we were developing a template for RFPs, which are request for proposals, we said the feasibility process is a bit dynamic, and that we can provide support and funding for congregations to work through feasibilities at different stages, depending where they're at. So do you want to talk a little bit about the processes, the visioning, and the different things where they may want funding for? Or I can do that.
Sorry. Yeah. And I think, I think looking at the different options that we have, like, again, it's really going to be unique, but part of what we do is also connecting the right fit for the right provider to the church. And, so much of the success of a project is going to be based on fit as well.
Great. Okay, and so I'm going to move into the next section, and some of you have heard that there have been grants, that we're providing grants to help congregations do feasibility studies. And we have a template for you to work with and get it's called a request for proposal. So for you to put out there what you'd like to do and help to identify some of the experts who might help you do this. And so this may be helping the church clearly establish their vision, and I'm going to say more about that. It can be analyzing the current resources available, mapping out options, and as far as coming up with a preliminary implementation plan. And one of the reasons that we've done this and that we've made this into a grant process as opposed to a loan process is that this is very hard work and very important work that you need to get right at the very beginning of your work. And we've seen that often it gets done because of who is in the congregation. Somebody has a little bit of experience in this, somebody is an architect, somebody's done this, somebody has some developing experience. So they have a sense of what's being done and they really want to do something. But then as they go down, it gets more complicated and more complicated. And we thought if they had experts who were really experienced in this work right from the very beginning, they might avoid some of the challenges that they had originally. So through this whole process, what we're trying to do is connect congregations with experts in the redevelopment process. Often these might be people who have urban planning experience. Sometimes they're architects. Sometimes they're broader areas. You may find that there's different professionals who can help you at different levels. So you might start with somebody who's doing the visioning work and some of the initial planning work, and then see how they work out. They might not be the ones who you eventually work with in development. They might just say, well, here's all the funding, and here are actually some of the people that you can work with and would be good to work with. So we will work with you, Ainsley and I, to help identify this if your church is interested in starting. And we've been working with churches who just are kind of at the where do we begin process to ones that are already a bit of the ways down the process. One thing is important is that we want to work with experts in development so that the congregational leaders and members can focus on mission and ministry. There is no doubt any church that's going to embark on this, it's going to take time and energy from your volunteers. And we want to make sure that that's time and energy well spent, and that it doesn't take so much that everybody's completely exhausted by the time they're done. So we're hoping that having the right people, the right experts, can really free up the ministers and the congregation members who maybe don't have expertise in this, so that they can focus on areas they do have expertise in. All right, so just a few notes, and I'm going to go to show you the application process when we get to that. But our idea is that we will help congregations work on how their vision for mission and ministry connects to their building and to their property. So we have a hope that the congregations will already have worked on their vision for mission and ministry, their general vision. We have different programs at the church, such as New Beginnings. There's the Center for Missional Studies that has a program. There's different programs that can help. There's independent consultants that can help a church if they're like, oh, we've been doing ministry the same way for the past 50 years and we want to do something new. So we're looking at ones, the congregation sort of has done that, but they want to redefine it more. They want to say, oh, we know that our building is underused or underutilized, and we'd really like to be better stewards of it. And we want to know what are the possibilities and how can we do this? So you may work with professionals who would help refine the goals and priorities of the congregation, particularly connected to the building. Provides opportunities right from the very beginning to talk about and honor history, including celebrating the past and honoring the fears and grief, because it's not unusual, as we've talked to congregations who've gone through this, where everybody thought everything was going along well, and then all of a sudden there's roadblocks. And this is often coming because people didn't realize, oh, this is actually going to happen. It's going to change the place of worship that I've always been connected to. It's going to bring in new people. It might change the look of it, maybe a completely new space for a congregation. So by talking about that right at the very beginning and continuing to integrate it through the whole process, that can be very helpful. So visioning can be part of what your church applies for grants for. The visioning process, we kind of think, and I'll show you where it is online, that might be around $5,000 for doing that type of work. It's really when you're getting into some of these next sections that are going to cost a lot more money because it's specialized skills that you're paying for. So from a vision analysis, visioning process, you could go into a situation analysis. This can include things like looking at the finances and the capital fund reserves of the congregation to say what financial resources do they have. It can be an extensive review of the property and building, including the building use and documents such as tenancy agreements and rent and that, and really review the property and structure. And make sure that this is going to be suitable for some type of redevelopment. And then particularly, as Ainsley mentioned, conducting neighborhood and community and interested party reviews, particularly municipalities and their planning documents, and how any redevelopment could fit in to the municipal government, because their interest as well is supposed to be at least social good. And so churches have often played a role there, and we just want to continue to say we have a role, we can play a role into the future, and that this is something that we can do. So there's ideas there about where you can get the information and what you can do, but really you're assessing your finances, your building condition, the leadership capacity, the political environment. You're seeing what needs are in the community and what maybe unique things your building has that it could do and the role that it could play. Right. Then you can move on to building a project plan. And this may be somebody, like once you have those sort of situation analysis, then you might move on to your project plan, and it might be you're working with the same people or different people, depending on what you have. But it would begin to answer questions like, how much space do we want for a congregation if there's going to be congregation space? And we see the majority of projects would have some space for a congregation. What's needed for the social good, if it's going to be housing, what ratios there might be in market, affordable, subsidized rent, and commercial space. This is really a plan that captures and says how the building and property could fulfill your vision. It's probably going to change as the project moves along, as things are costed out. It's going to be adaptable, and there's going to be things that happen, but this sort of gives you something to start with and helps you to articulate what might be possible. And then you could ask a consultant to do some option mapping once you have all of those other questions, 2 or 3 options that provide opportunities to redevelop and give the congregation or your committee, whoever you've allocated to do this, to discuss and review in order to move to a final plan. The feasibility study can also include elements of a preliminary implementation plan, which shows things like timing frames, financing needs, recommendations on how to build the capacity to move through the project, legal consultations, and ways to proceed through an implementation plan. Again, all of these areas are areas that we see are needed and essential in order for you to access often pre-development funds from municipal, provincial, or federal governments. And then if you have these plans and sort of you say, yes, this is possible, then we can often access additional funding, which then you get into pre-development and plans and studies that each level kind of goes deeper. And as you successfully move through them, then you're like, oh, okay, this actually actual implementation. One thing that we know congregations will need to have are advisory committees, somebody who's got the time and ability to work with developers and work with the congregation and make sure that everything is lining up. Advisory committees are the ones who often keep that vision that was started this work in mind and say, this is what we're doing and the priorities, because there'll be lots of decisions that need to be made as we go along. The committee may help to secure and assess requests for proposals and determine who are the ones you want to work with. Definitely so important is communicate progress and updates to the congregation, to the presbytery, and I'll talk about that a little bit more, and as well as with the national office. And so these are sort of important skills that your advisory committees may have, and they may be made of a variety of people. Some things that we think are helpful skills for such a committee is that they're well connected to members of the congregation and or presbytery, as well as the community. They're able to bridge connections to any partners or local agencies you might be able to work with. They will help their project stay on track with the vision. They're going to keep the congregation motivated. They're good listeners and strong communicators. And they really, a big role is just building the trust of the community and getting them excited. They need to have time and energy and particularly staying power because this project can take 5 to 10 years to get started. And we've seen others that have even been 15 years before they're actually completed. And it's important to say that some of the members of the committee may come from another congregation or your presbytery or community members. So you really want to look at people who are going to help this project move along. One thing that's not often helpful for the committee is somebody who tries to do work in lieu of the experts. There may be a variety of experience, but we want those roles to be filled by professionals who have some degree of success in this or experience that will help the project be successful. And we have seen, and we're seeing it more and more as we go into these projects, that the language spoken by the church can be very different from the language spoken by the development professionals, even nonprofit development professionals. So we do want to have that bridge there. And yeah, just we cannot emphasize this enough that churches aren't expected to become developers. We want churches to focus on ministry. And particularly if a project, once it's come to fruition, we want that to be thought about. How will it be managed? What are the long-term goals of that? The church isn't in the business of developing land just to make money or even provide social programs. The church is to fulfill God's mission. And so we can partner with people who may have expertise in these other areas and allow us to continue being the church. And that said, I'll ask Ainsley to say a few words as she's worked with churches just about some of the challenges and opportunities, maybe just highlight them.
So some of the things that churches are facing that are keeping them from moving forward or causing some blocks, one is grief. And I think for lots of folks, it's really hard, even within a church. You may have folks who have really accepted that the church is changing, the neighborhood's changing, way down here, and they're visioning new possibilities. But there's always going to be some folks in the church who are accept the fact that the future they thought they had may not be there anymore. And so it's really hard to envision something new and creative when you still haven't gone through a grieving process. So that's something that's really important, to give space to churches, to church members, to talk about who your history is, and to acknowledge the sadness or fear or anxiety. It's good to talk about that. That's a normal part of the grief process. And I think that that's something that will help people get on board. The more you spend on the back end to support congregation members through this process, the more supportive and excited and motivated they'll be on the other side. Obviously, this is a big project. It's brand new. There's a lot of fear of anxiety, and that's what Karen and I are working on, is how can we help you with a pathway and support you. Volunteers are, as Karen mentioned, they may not have the skills and they may not have the energy, but that's okay, because we're bringing in qualified experts to help. We don't want, just because you are a very successful expert in a particular area doesn't mean you're going to be after the person to carry the project. We want to get you the resources you need. I think I mentioned a little bit about some misunderstanding. I think that I've heard from some churches say, well, we want to do housing, but we're a middle class neighborhood. And so there just needs to be a little bit more discussion about who needs housing and how that might fit into your community, into your building. We've also seen churches that can get folks from the outside really excited, saying, you know what, if you let me take on this project, I'm going to make you so much money, and then you can put it back into the church. And I think one of the challenges is that sometimes when you get external folks, the idea of generating revenue for a church, I think, is good. It's well-intentioned, but it doesn't always align with what the church wants to achieve. And if you were to sit down with a congregation and say, what is actually our true vision and what's our legacy, it may be very different and broader in a different direction than just generating revenue. We're seeing a lot more funding opening up to help churches get past these first few hurdles. We're also seeing a lot of changes to zoning and planning policies. When a church comes, heritage is a really common challenge. A lot of municipalities are responding by saying, if you were a private development generating a lot of revenue, you're kind of on your own for dealing and paying for heritage work on your building. But we also don't want to be in a position where we're letting heritage prevent much needed housing or much needed community space. So lots of municipalities are becoming a lot more flexible about their zoning and a lot more open to negotiating and discussing things that used to stop a project like heritage, especially, like I said, if it's meeting a social goal and a need of the community. Municipalities are a lot more flexible, and CMHC has a number of projects researching this. And this is also long-term. I think, it's something where it's possible that folks on the committee may not be around to see the final product. And it's just to know that these could be 5 to 10 to 15 year.
Great. And I'll just say something in your feasibility study. One of the things that you'll look at is funding sources and where funds may come from and how much may come from the church. And we sort of know our traditional ways of funding things, from the offering plate and special projects and endowment and legacy funds, to accessing grants and loans and doing projects as a shared partnership and sharing expenses with other partners. So definitely identifying funding sources and saying what's realistic about funding is really important. And we drafted up a few of these little, examples to show you that sometimes when you are doing a funding or when you're looking at your priorities, you're going to say, well, we would like to do everything. We want to really have a deep impact on the housing process, on the social good. We want to have a project that's really environmentally friendly, and we want to have revenue and or space for mission and ministry. And sometimes, though, as we move our way through the feasibility studies, this begins to shift. And so we find that if you're really wanting to have a deep impact on housing and social good, the revenue that you're going to have for the congregation to do mission and ministry and or the space may become a little bit less. You have to give up some in order to get others. And it may end up shifting and being less eco-friendly. We would like to do everything, but it just sometimes you have to make decisions about what the priority is. And the same way is that if you're looking for a really revolutionary green building, often the amount of space that there's going to be for affordable housing will be less, and the revenue will be less. And sometimes this is really important, and it will be different for different congregations. So we've seen everything from congregations who said, we've got land and property, and we've got a really old building, and we need a revenue to try and maintain this old building that's got lots of great things going on for it. And that'll help decide who you're going to work with and what developers or what you're going to develop. It might be that you're doing some housing that has a lot less affordable housing and more market rent, because the revenue from that housing is going to help support the congregational and the maintenance of that older congregational building. Other ones, they're like, affordable housing, that's our passion. That is our mission and ministry and where we want to serve. And so we're going to do everything we can. We're not even looking for a revenue from this project, because our church and congregation are going to continue to support the minister and continue to do the programs they are. The revenue isn't as important as it is that we have really strong affordable housing, that we're really serving the community there, and that maybe they have some space that will cost them less or that will be suited for their mission and ministry. So these priorities will change as you go along. All right. So I feel like we're throwing a lot of information at you, but you are going to be able to come back and review these and review the slides. And we're almost to the point of the Q&A. So I'm just going to touch a little bit on the grants that are available to help congregations, presbyteries, and or specialized ministries. So when we have thought about this, we've thought for congregations that are fairly healthy and robust and who are looking long-term to their building, that this can and should be a congregationally driven process. And that's great. And we have already been working with congregations at all different levels who are doing this. In some instances, it might be the presbytery that has a land where the congregation has already dissolved and they think, you know, this has really great potential for redevelopment. It might be a presbytery driven process. And or some of our specialized ministries have land and access to land, and they want to revamp or have it developed as well. So things like some of the Indigenous ministries or the camps could explore some of this. We do have a request for proposal templates that touch on each of these issues and will help you articulate what you want and what you're requesting professional help for. The Assembly Council released $2.5 million from the New and Renewing Ministry funds. And those are funds that when a congregation dissolves or closes, that's where the national office funds have gone into this fund. And so grants will be provided for up to $75,000 for both feasibility and pre-development studies. So it is important that you think about, because it's not unlimited funds, where is the most strategic and what do we bring to the table and what are our strengths and skills if we're going to apply for a grant. But yeah, we are happy to work with you through the RFP to develop your request for proposal. And what you'll do is that you'll go for 3 probably that you want to really dive deep into, and you want to be sure that you're considering the cost money is important, but sometimes the cheapest isn't the best. So you also want the qualifications of the group. How successful are they doing development? How good are they working with faith? How well do their values align with yours? And how does it help fulfill the goals and the vision and connecting to God's mission? Once you've decided on a proposal that you want funding, you can come to the committee to apply for the grant. Now, the type of questions, I will say that the very, very important, and we have a committee that will review the grants, and we worked in June and have now posted the application and the criteria online. But this is so important. As I can never say enough, the church is not in the business of making money just for the purpose of making money. We're in the business of participating and helping to fulfill God's mission. So we want this to be God-driven and to be prayerfully considered and to really connect with who we are as a church. So in that sense, it needs to be connected to a Presbyterian congregation, presbytery, or ministry. Very important, it has to have the presbytery support, as the presbytery is ultimately responsible for mission and buildings and property in their bounds. And we're looking for clear communication plans with the presbytery, the congregation, the session, the community, and other interested parties. Keeping people informed and up to date and involving them in the decisions and listening to their concerns is all an important part of making these successful projects. We are already aware that redevelopment is expensive, it's high risk, and requires a lot of skills. We can see and anticipate that there may be many feasibility projects and only a few successfully completed projects. So we're hoping this process will help both congregations and presbyteries learn what is involved in property redevelopment and what is realistically possible for their ministry and or region. And yeah, that's really important. And also, we're just learning along with everyone else. Some of this is really cutting edge ministry. It's been done before. They had quite a bit of redevelopment done back in the 80s, some of them where the mortgages are finally coming due 25 years later in the early 2000s. But we're trying to learn from their experiences, see how the context is different today, and share ecumenically and across denominations what works. So where can you find information about the grant process? You can go onto the Presbyterian site, and I always go to the search button and I just look up grants, and that brings you to this page on funds, which if you scroll down, there's a whole section on providing capital funds, and you'll see this one right at the top called Redevelopment of Property. And it will note that the committee will be meeting monthly through the fall of 2025 and winter 2026 to consider emerging applications. So if you click on that redevelopment of property, it's going to take you to this that talks about the fund for new and renewing ministry funds. And you can see that there are a few different funds you can apply for. And if you're talking about redevelopment, you want to apply for the redevelopment property grant. And there's the application form. So you can see the little download button. That's going to download a Word document that's got lots of words in it, but it's going to really outline the grant process. It's going to tell you guidelines, and it's going to tell you what the committee is going to base their decisions on. And then if you click on this redevelopment of property grant application form, it's going to take you to the questions. And the questions are going to explore things like who is doing the project and who is overseeing the project. So it's going to ask for a little background on the congregation and the ministry. It's going to ask you for skills and dynamic of the committee, the experience of the people who will implement the work, why they're a good fit, and any of the partners that we're collaborating with. They're going to then ask, well, why do you want to do this project? What's the purpose? How will it address the social good as it helps the congregation participate in God's mission? Have you talked to the community, the local businesses, nonprofits to determine and confirm needs and potential success of the project? Now, it might be that your feasibility study is going to say, oh yeah, this is part of the feasibility study, but you may say, we've had some initial conversations and we know that we're right across from a school and we've got some nonprofits serving in the area, but we want to go deep and say, do we have things that are aligned or needs that could collaborate together? So you just have to say what it is you want to do. What impact you anticipate the project having on the community and why the support of the national church is needed. And these don't have to be difficult questions. It can be things like, it's needed because this is very expensive and we're using our resources to do mission and ministry. And so, yeah, it doesn't have to be complicated answers. We'll look a little bit for the breakdown of the amount that's requested, timeline for the grant, contributions from any others, and other potential sources of future funding, just to say that you've thought this through and what you're aware of. And finally, very, very important, we'll ask for copies of minutes to be uploaded, both from the session and or board, the congregation and or ministry, and then for the presbytery. So this is all very important. We have some suggested language, sample language, very simple, that is below, that says that the congregation, the session, is in support of this redevelopment work and will be continued to be engaged, that the presbytery has approved of the redevelopment intent and will continue to be engaged throughout the discernment and decision-making phases. So that's very important. And then you come to a submit button, and that's how you submit the application off to us. Again, the committee will be meeting monthly. Our next meeting is September 18th. And then from that meeting, we'll set the other meetings as they come up. But it should be able to meet. We know these projects are emerging, and with some of them, there's grant deadlines and that. So we want to keep moving and be supportive of congregations. And that said, so it was an hour of presentation, and I'm sorry, we always think that we'll be able to cover it in a short period of time. And those are the Cole's notes of everything that we know. But it's your time for your questions and feedback. So we're open to have discussion. I will say that we are planning to have some more of these presentations, particularly case studies from congregations who have either done development or are working on development. If you know of any that you think would be a great case study, send me in. But I have somebody working already to share the story of Knox Spadina, who did a development, and some of the learnings that came from that and ins and outs. So watch for promotion of that in the near future. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Maggie, do we have any questions that came on the chat that need to be answered right away? Okay.
Yeah, so there are questions. One is, are there consultants who specialize in the feasibility studies? I think that has been answered. And if you have no information to add on, please feel free.
Yeah, maybe Ainsley, you can talk about the list that you're maintaining, your Rolodex.
Yeah, and I think something that Karen mentioned is that who you bring in for your feasibility doesn't have to be the person you stick with the whole time. It may be the best fit. There's a lot of different, there's the number of people who do feasibility is quite broad. You can have everyone from a full service urban planning firm to just an architecture firm. Each firm offers a different suite of services. Some are a little bit narrower. The other thing around feasibility is you don't have to have the company that does it doesn't have to be in your community. Depending on what level of feasibility you're looking at, a lot of the work can actually be done remotely. They can look and they can take a look and see what shape your property is, where it is. They can look at your planning guidelines, and right off the bat, they can tell you quite a bit about what can and can't be done on a property and advise you whether you should continue this feasibility study, because sometimes they may just say a quick glance, there's not really much you can do, or they may say, you know what, there may be a lot. So the shortest answer is I do keep a list of folks that I can't speak to the the quality of their work, but they're people that are well respected in the sector and that I would trust to have a conversation with churches, because not all developers, they say they want to work with churches, but not all developers actually have the skill set or patience or interest to spend the time to really get to know churches. So that's something that I screen for. Would I feel comfortable putting this person in front of a session? Yes or no, and then that's sort of how I narrow down the list.
And sometimes when we say person, it can be a small company from like to one person. And as you get closer and closer to development, then you're going to get closer and closer to local people being more essential. Like you've got to have somebody who's there. But I agree, certainly at those beginning phases, is affordable housing, for example, appropriate for us or not in this region? Do we have the land? Do we have the expertise? So yeah, and where we don't have expertise, we also will then talk around and talk to our networks and see where we can find and what holes there are to fill. And that said, we're also going to send calls out to our churches that say, if you've done development and you've found people who are really good at this, please let us know so that we can refer them.
All right. So are there a lot of congregations that are creating rentable spaces to fund their mission and outreach programs?
Mm-hmm. So we've considered already, I think, 6 applications for grants, and one of them was one that was only looking at revising their space for community and social good. And in part, it was for money to support their mission and ministry, but they were also looking at that as being part of their mission and ministry. So the groups that they were wanting to use the space were groups that aligned with the church and the mission and ministry that they wanted to accomplish. So I think particularly as we go to some smaller communities where your community is losing community space and that's a need, there could be more that just focus on revamping the space for the community and the social good. But the majority so far are looking at some type of affordable housing, but it's certainly not restricted to that.
Great. 2 questions about the grants. Is the 2.5 million renewing or just until the funds are all issued by grants?
Right. So the fund of the new and renewing is much larger than 2.5. There are some other things that fund is used for. So as far as we know, so the 2.5 is what we have to begin with, and we're going to report along to Assembly Council at their meetings. They meet twice a year, and they're the ones who can authorize more funds to be released. So 2.5 is the amount that we have to work with in the immediate, but we already can see, just that we're going to have to report back and say, how is this going? How successful it is? What is the demand out there? And keep them informed. Because even when we were having this conversation at the last Assembly Council meeting, we weren't sure. We knew we had done a survey, we'd found out, all of these projects that are underway, but let's see what the demand is and then where we go from there. All of this process is adapting, listening, growing as we go along.
So do the grants allow for studies on infrastructure, just like water, sewage, and utilities that may be required for a development proposal?
Go ahead, Ainsley.
I think, when we talked about what the need is, what we're trying to do is to fill the gap where there's no other funding elsewhere. So once you start getting to sort of the bigger studies and the more comprehensive studies, they cost a lot more, they have to work together. They're also part of the next stage. that's where CMHC funding is going to be really critical. So what we don't want is to be duplicating CMHC funding. This funding is designed to pay for the smaller early studies where it's really hard to find money. But the idea is to use these funds to get churches far enough down the road that they can then use that data to apply for the bigger amounts of money. It's really just to be a stopgap and then to get churches to where bigger amounts of money. We're also, part of again, working with the housing sector is advocating for more money, because what's happened is CMHC released pre-development seed money, and all of the money was gone this year within 6 weeks. So that's a bad story, but it's also a good story, because what that means is lots of people are now putting in applications for housing for housing pre-development money. And so that's something that we're really pushing CMHC, is now we can say churches are also in the game, and we're also looking at a lot more housing development. So we really need to get more funds into pre-development.
What is CMHC?
CMHC is the Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation, and they have a large part of funding. So most development projects either get some sort of funding or some sort of incentives or some sort of insurance. All development projects have to go through CMHC at some point. CMHC is really the federal body that's driving and supporting local building and construction.
And I'll say from the committee as well, when they approve the size of the grants, it also is based on the capacity and size of the program. So for example, if it's renovating a church to provide more social good, the feasibility study of that aspect is what it wouldn't need the same amount than if you're looking at putting a 10-story project or a tower on a church property or something like that. So we are trying to sort of look at what's the scope of the project and how large might the grants be, so that we match those up. So far, it's been really encouraging. There have been, we've had applications for projects for student housing, for housing with people with disabilities, and then just some that are just beginning that exploration of the affordable housing and really wanting to serve that deeply affordable and the supportive levels of housing. And then we've had conversations with congregations who are just getting started and just saying, we have this great building, it's in a great location, and we just want to know the possibilities. And so they're at the beginning stages.
Okay, so we clear the Q&A questions that are on the chat. And,
I think everybody's been unmuted, and I'm just looking at the time. We're at 1:23. If anyone has any questions they want to ask, otherwise, before I let you do that, because I'm going to invite anyone who's sort of like, oh, I got my information and I want to go. I want to say thank you for joining us. Watch for more information. Do contact us if you're thinking about this, because we do one-on-one conversations with sessions and with presbyteries, and we're happy to work with you to discern what does this actually mean in our context. And yeah, we're here to help, and looking forward to it.